The streets of the city were filled with unrest, a powder keg on the brink of exploding. The once bustling neighborhood now felt like a battlefield, the sounds of shouting protesters blending with the distant crackling of flames as riot police clashed with demonstrators. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and fear. Shops were boarded up, their windows shattered by angry fists, and people ran through the streets in a chaotic frenzy, as if the whole city was unraveling at the seams. In the heart of this mayhem stood Jordan, a 12-year-old boy whose life had never been easy, but now seemed defined by the world around him. His clothes were worn and torn, a stark contrast to the towering buildings surrounding him. His face, youthful but hardened by years of hardship, remained focused and determined as he weaved through the crowds. With a few scraps of cloth and metal in his hands, he moved with purpose, knowing that his sick mother and baby sister needed him more than ever. Jordan's life was a constant battle. His mother's health had deteriorated rapidly, and he had taken it upon himself to support their family, collecting whatever he could from the streets, anything that could be sold or repurposed. The chaos outside his doorstep had only made survival harder, but Jordan had learned to adapt. He wasn't a stranger to hardship, and he wasn't about to let the turmoil around him defeat him. As he walked, his eyes caught glimpses of the city's wealthier areas, where life seemed untouched by the surrounding madness. It was hard for him to imagine a life in those pristine neighborhoods. Still, his heart remained hopeful that one day things would change, not just for him, but for his family, and maybe even for the people in this fractured city. Little did he know, his quiet determination was about to collide with a world far beyond his understanding, a world that would change his life forever. The situation on the streets escalated quickly, from a peaceful demonstration to a full-blown disaster. The air was thick with tension when a loud explosion shattered the fragile calm. The sound reverberated through the marketplace, followed by an immediate burst of smoke and chaos. People screamed as flames began to spread rapidly, engulfing nearby buildings and cars in their fiery grip. The chaos spread like wildfire, with debris falling from the skies as the air turned thick with ash. Panic spread through the crowd like a contagion, and people ran in all directions, desperate to escape the inferno that was quickly overtaking the neighborhood. Jordan, crouched behind an alley to salvage what little he could, witnessed the unfolding catastrophe. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins as he watched the fire creep closer. The towering flames licked at the sky, casting an ominous glow over the streets. For a moment, the boy froze, unsure of how to react to the overwhelming chaos. But then his attention shifted to something else, the sound of a baby crying. The wails pierced through the madness, and Jordan's eyes snapped to a nearby luxury car that had been overturned in the explosion. It was caught in the inferno, flames licking at the sides of the vehicle, but through the smoke, Jordan could just make out the cries coming from inside. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't hesitate for a second. Without thinking, Jordan sprinted toward the car, his small frame darting between fallen debris and scorching flames. His clothes, already ragged, felt heavier as the heat from the fire grew intense, but he pushed on. With every step, the cries grew louder, and the desperation in them drove him forward. A part of him screamed to turn away and find safety, but another part of him, the part that had always been the protector, compelled him to act. As he neared the car, the heat was unbearable, the flames dangerously close. With a determined resolve, Jordan dove into the fire's edge and reached for the overturned car door. The flames danced menacingly around him as he struggled to open the door, his hands trembling but steady with purpose. The cries of the baby grew louder, and Jordan gritted his teeth, finally managing to pry open the door. Inside, amidst the smoke and heat, was a baby, safely strapped into a car seat, but clearly terrified. Without hesitation, Jordan pulled the baby free, lifting the child into his arms as the fire roared around him. His heart raced in his chest as he made his way back through the smoke-filled streets, each step bringing him closer to safety, but also deeper into the firestorm. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. The flames were inching closer, licking at the sides of the overturned car, consuming everything in its path. Jordan could see the baby's tiny face through the smoke, its eyes wide with fear, and he knew that time was running out. The air was thick with the smell of burning rubber and wood, and the heat was nearly unbearable. As Jordan reached the car, he noticed the fine leather seats, the high-end interior. This car belonged to someone wealthy, someone whose life was far removed from his own. But none of that mattered now. The baby needed help. Jordan quickly assessed the situation. The child, around 8 months old, was strapped into a car seat, whimpering, clearly distressed. Flames licked at the edges of the car, casting an eerie orange glow through the shattered windows. He couldn't waste any more time. He rushed to unbuckle the car seat, his hands shaking slightly from the tension and the heat, but he remained focused. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he struggled with the buckle, the fire creeping closer, its crackling roar growing louder in his ears. The crowd had gathered behind him now, their voices urgent, shouting for him to leave, to run for safety. Some were screaming at him to get away from the car, that it was too dangerous, but Jordan's determination was unwavering. He gritted his teeth, pulling harder on the buckle, finally managing to release it. The baby, still scared but unharmed, was now free. Jordan quickly lifted the child into his arms, clutching the baby protectively against his chest as he looked around for shelter. The fire was growing rapidly, and the heat was oppressive. The crowd had started to panic, with people pushing and shoving, rushing to escape the fire. But Jordan wasn't going to leave the baby behind. Spotting an empty garbage bin nearby, he quickly made his decision. Without a second thought, he placed the baby gently inside the bin, trying to shield him from the worst of the heat. The lid of the bin was loosely placed on top, and Jordan knew that the baby would be somewhat protected from the direct flames, though the smoke still filled the air. With the baby secured, Jordan took a deep breath and began to push the bin through the chaos. His heart raced in his chest as he navigated the streets, avoiding falling debris and trying to stay ahead of the encroaching fire. The crackling flames were closing in, and the heat from the fire made it feel like he was walking through a furnace. Every step he took was a risk, every turn in the street more dangerous than the last. The wind carried the smoke in all directions, but Jordan's focus remained solely on getting the baby to safety. There were moments when the flames seemed almost too close, when debris would crash to the ground just inches away from him, but he didn't stop. With a combination of sheer will and instinct, Jordan pushed the bin down the street, keeping it as steady as he could. He could hear the shouts of people around him, but he blocked them out, his eyes locked on the path ahead. His only thought was getting the baby out of harm's way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jordan made it to a safer area, far enough from the fire's reach. He stopped to catch his breath, his chest heaving, sweat soaking his clothes, but his eyes never left the baby. The child was still in the bin, safe, albeit startled, and Jordan felt a wave of relief wash over him. Jordan had barely managed to catch his breath when he saw the first signs of hope. Ahead of him, a group of paramedics and police officers had set up a perimeter near a safer section of the street. It was an area far enough from the advancing fire and falling debris, where people were trying to regroup, assess injuries, and provide assistance. As he approached, he noticed a distressed couple, frantic with worry, standing at the edge of the makeshift safe zone. The woman, her eyes red and swollen from tears, was clutching her husband's arm tightly. The man, looking every bit the wealthy businessman he was pacing anxiously. The couple was clearly in distress, their eyes scanning the crowd desperately, hoping to catch a glimpse of their child. Jordan's heart raced again, but not from fear this time. This was the moment he had been pushing toward. With the bin still in hand, he slowly made his way towards the couple, his shoes heavy with ash and soot. His face, now smudged with dirt and covered in bruises from the chaos, was still determined. He could see the relief in the couple's eyes as they noticed the bin in his hands. Is that our son?" the woman asked, her voice trembling as she took a step forward. Jordan nodded, his voice hoarse but steady. "I found him in the fire. He's safe now." The woman, Claire Monroe, gasped as she rushed forward, her hands shaking as she lifted the baby from the bin. Her husband, Ethan Monroe, stepped forward too, his relief palpable as he immediately wrapped his arms around his family. "Oh, my God, thank you. Thank you so much," Claire said, her voice choked with emotion. She hugged the baby to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Jordan stood back, watching the reunion in silence. He felt a mix of exhaustion and pride wash over him. He had done it. Despite everything, despite the flames, the panic, the chaos, he had saved this child. It was a feeling he couldn't fully describe, but it was one that filled him with a quiet, hard-earned satisfaction. Ethan Monroe turned to Jordan, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We don't even know how to thank you. You saved our son's life. You risked everything for him." Jordan, covered in soot, bruised and scratched from the ordeal, simply nodded. "I didn't do it for thanks. I just wanted to help. He's just a baby." Claire Monroe stepped closer to Jordan, wiping away her tears. "You're a hero. No one else would have done what you did." Jordan shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his worn clothes. "I'm just a kid, ma'am. I didn't have a choice." Ethan Monroe put a hand on his shoulder, looking him in the eye. "Well, we're going to make sure you get the thanks you deserve, and we'll never forget what you did for us." As the paramedics continued their work in the background, Claire and Ethan focused entirely on their child, overwhelmed by the fact that they were reunited. But they hadn't forgotten Jordan's selflessness. The Monroes exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes. This young boy had done something extraordinary, something that not many adults would have been brave enough to attempt. Ethan Monroe turned to the officers nearby. "Make sure this young man is taken care of. He's earned more than just our gratitude." As Jordan watched them walk off, a sense of pride filled him, though he was too humble to fully accept the weight of their words. He didn't need their praise. Saving a life had already felt like more than enough. Claire Monroe's hands trembled as she held her son close to her chest, her tears falling freely onto his tiny face. She gently rocked him back and forth, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, love, and overwhelming gratitude. Her baby was safe. Her precious child, who had been moments away from a terrifying fate, was now in her arms unharmed thanks to this brave boy standing before her. Ethan Monroe, still in shock, took a few steps toward Jordan before pulling him into an embrace. His arms wrapped around the young boy, who looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Thank you," Ethan whispered hoarsely, his voice breaking. "Thank you for saving him. You saved our son. You saved our family." Jordan was taken aback, unsure how to respond to the intense gratitude pouring from the Monroes. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't do it for thanks, sir. I just couldn't let him. He's just a baby. No one deserves to lose someone they love." His voice was calm, steady, as if his actions had been no big deal, just something anyone would have done. But in that moment, the weight of the rescue hung in the air between them. Claire looked up at Jordan, her eyes filled with admiration and tears. "You're a hero. Do you understand that? You saved him when no one else could." Jordan shook his head slightly, a modest smile creeping onto his lips. "I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done." As Jordan spoke, bystanders who had witnessed the dramatic rescue began gathering around, their phones raised, capturing the moment for social media. The footage of a young boy risking his life to save a baby in the middle of a chaotic firestorm quickly spread across platforms. The video went viral almost instantly, and soon the world knew Jordan's name. News outlets reached out for interviews, and people from all corners of the city praised his bravery. Yet through all the attention, Jordan remained grounded. He didn't care for the fame or the recognition. All that mattered was the safety of the child he had saved. As the cameras flashed around him, Jordan stood humbly, his gaze focused on the Monroes. He had done something remarkable, but in his heart, he had simply acted on the belief that helping others was the right thing to do. Jordan's life had never been easy. Raised in a rundown neighborhood, he had learned early on that survival often meant making the best out of what little you had. His father had left before he was born, and his mother, a single woman fighting a chronic illness, struggled daily to provide for them both. Her sickness made it difficult for her to work consistently, and Jordan often had to pick up the slack, doing odd jobs to make sure there was enough food on the table. But despite the hardships, Jordan always tried to keep a kind heart. He would use the small allowance he earned to buy food for the elderly neighbors who couldn't leave their homes, or he would help others in need whenever he saw an opportunity. He helped kids who didn't have enough money for school supplies, and when a local shopkeeper's cart broke, Jordan was the first one to offer assistance, no matter how tired or hungry he was. Jordan didn't complain about his circumstances. Instead, he had a quiet determination to protect his mother and do whatever he could to make life a little easier for them both. His resilience came from the deep love he had for her, and his belief that he could make the world a better place, even if just a little at a time. It was this same kindness and selflessness that led him to risk his life to save a child he didn't even know. While the world around him often seemed cold and indifferent, Jordan's heart remained warm. He didn't need recognition or reward. His greatest joy was simply helping others. The next day, as Jordan made his way back from his usual errands, he was caught off guard by the sight of several sleek, luxury cars parked outside his modest apartment. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the shiny vehicles, knowing they didn't belong in his neighborhood. His legs felt heavy as he walked up the steps to his building, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. As he reached the entrance to his apartment, he saw Ethan Monroe, the billionaire father of the child he had saved the previous day, step out of one of the cars. Accompanied by a team of well-dressed lawyers and several media representatives, Ethan's presence seemed almost surreal. Jordan stood frozen, his mind racing as to why they were here. Was there some mistake? Did they think he wanted something for what he did? "Jordan," Ethan greeted him with a serious but kind tone. "Can we talk for a moment?" Jordan, still dazed by the whole situation, nodded and tried to swallow the lump in his throat. Yeah, sure. What's this about?" Ethan smiled softly, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of admiration. "First of all, I want to say thank you. What you did for my family yesterday, saving my son, it was extraordinary. It's something that can never be repaid in full." Jordan felt his face flush, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He hadn't expected anything in return for what had happened. In his mind, saving the baby had just been the right thing to do. He had acted instinctively, without thinking about the consequences or reward. Ethan continued, "But after what you did, I couldn't let your life stay the way it is. You deserve so much more than what you've had. I've seen the way you carry yourself, even in the hardest of circumstances. You saved my son, Jordan, and I want to make sure you and your family have the life you deserve." Jordan blinked in confusion, not understanding where this conversation was going. Ethan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I want to help you," he said, and handed Jordan the envelope. "Inside, you'll find the property papers for a house far away from where you live now. It's a new beginning for you and your family." Jordan's fingers trembled as he opened the envelope. He had no idea what to expect, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. There, right in front of him, were the official property papers for a house that was miles away from the dangerous, run-down area where he had spent his entire life. The address on the papers indicated a neighborhood that was calm, safe, and full of opportunities, a world that felt like it belonged to someone else. I don't know what to say," Jordan stammered, the weight of the gesture starting to sink in. This wasn't just a generous offer. It was an entire shift in his reality, a chance at a life he never thought was possible. His heart raced, but his mind was still reeling from the enormity of the moment. His mother's medical bills, which had always been a source of stress and fear, would now be taken care of. And there was more. Ethan's team handed him another document. "This is a scholarship for you to attend the best schools in the city," Ethan said. "You've earned the chance to make something of yourself, and I want to make sure you have every opportunity to do that. It's the least I can do." Jordan could hardly breathe. A part of him couldn't believe what was happening, as if this was a dream he would wake up from at any moment. The life he'd known, one of constant struggle, looking after his mother and scraping by in a rough neighborhood, was slowly slipping away, replaced by something else, something better, something that was beyond his wildest hopes. "You don't have to do all of this," Jordan said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't save your son for anything in return." Ethan smiled warmly, placing a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "I know you didn't. But I can't sit back and let someone like you continue to live in these conditions after what you did. You deserve so much more. Your heart, your bravery, your resilience, it's extraordinary. I just want to help you." Tears welled up in Jordan's eyes as he looked at Ethan, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I never thought something like this would happen to me. I don't even know how to thank you." "There's no need for thanks," Ethan replied. "Just promise me this. Keep being the amazing person you are. Continue helping others, just like you did for my family. Don't let anything change that about you." Jordan wiped the tears away quickly, not wanting to show weakness, but inside he felt a deep sense of humility and awe. "I promise." Ethan nodded, his eyes softening. "And remember, we're here for you, whenever you need us. This isn't just about a house or school. This is about giving you a chance. A real chance." Jordan took a deep breath, looking down at the papers in his hands. He never imagined his life could change so drastically in such a short amount of time. This was more than he could have ever asked for. He glanced at Ethan, then at the team behind him, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. As the media gathered around, some asking questions, others taking photos, Jordan's heart began to settle. He knew things would never be the same again. And as he turned to go back to his apartment with a new future ahead of him, he felt ready to live a life where his struggles were no longer defining him, where his dreams could finally come true. And above all, he knew he would never forget how one small act of kindness had turned into a lifetime of opportunities. As Jordan and his mother unpacked their belongings in their new home, there was a sense of peace that had never existed before. The small, comfortable house in a quiet, safe neighborhood stood in stark contrast to the cramped, dilapidated apartment they had left behind. His mother, who had been struggling with her health for so long, smiled as she saw the treatment options open to her now, knowing that her son's bravery had given them both a chance at a new life. Jordan, for the first time in his life, wasn't burdened with the weight of constant fear and worry. He was no longer confined by the limitations of their past. As he sat in his new room, staring out the window, he couldn't help but reflect on the firestorm that had led to this moment, the chaos, the flames, and the life he had saved. He realized that it was his act of courage and kindness in the midst of danger that had shifted everything. In that brief moment, he had chosen to act selflessly, and in return, his life had been transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. With a renewed sense of hope and purpose, Jordan prepared for his first day at his new school. It was a new chapter, and this time, it was a chapter of possibilities. He had always dreamed of a better life, but now, that dream was becoming a reality. He knew that he would continue to be the person who helped others, just as he had done for the baby, just as he had done for his family. As he looked at the sunset from his new home, Jordan smiled. He realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything, and his journey had only just begun.